We're going to officially kick things off there now. We have started recording. As I said, I'm going to give it just another minute or two to allow people to enter the webinar. I do appreciate that it is a lunchtime webinar, which is always probably a good time, hopefully, that you can catch people eating at their desks. And at the same time, excuse me, I am conscious that you may catch people at their desks and they may not be able to join us. But again, hopefully I can be seen and heard. Again, a couple of familiar names coming in there to the room. So thanks for joining us. A few I don't recognize. So looking forward to a good chat. And again, I hope that if I can't be seen or heard, somebody will flag that up in the chats. I'm going to kick off on this now. So it's an annual publication we do, the National Social Monitor. The format is the same every time. We take the same 10 headings: education, housing, health, governance and participation, sustainability, the global south, and we just look at it through a slightly different lens each time. And as we'll say that, these areas of policy are huge. So by no means have we covered off even the tiniest tip of the iceberg for some of these topics. It's more just, I suppose, sometimes to even just spark off a conversation. This one is on youth policy. I am only too aware of the ridiculousness of somebody who distinctly remembers Pope John Paul II telling the young people of Ireland he loved them, discussing youth policy in 2026, but there you are, and here I am. We, in Social Justice Ireland, all of our publications are collaborative ventures. They're all joint ventures. So again, with this one, there was youth input into it. So, there was sort of consultation. It wasn't an older person saying, this is what I think. There was a lot of collaboration in this particular piece. So again, I just really wanted to acknowledge that. There will be a Q&A afterwards if I get through this ASAP. And again, feel free to put anything, comments, queries, questions. I'm open to comments as well as queries and questions in the chat or the Q&A. And again, I suppose really, like, just to set it out, like, this is necessary. This is a real necessary conversation. There are themes that run through youth regardless of when you were young. So I suppose there's a certainty that comes with being young, because you're absolutely right about everything that you think about when you're young. And at the same time, the surroundings are sort of slightly different. So I'm kind of conscious that for young people today, there was a lot of uncertainty. There was always uncertainty maybe as you enter into adulthood, but this particular time around, the news can be very, I suppose, disruptive. It's very, very hard to know how things are going to settle down. And even just the concept, I suppose, of youth policy again would be quite new. Phrases like teenagers didn't really come into effect until maybe the 1940s. So that bridging between childhood and adulthood, it is really, really important. And again, very conscious that decisions that are made today are going to impact somebody who's 20 for a lot longer than somebody who's in their 50s and 60s. So we are going to attempt to share screen now, just to pull up the actual slides. We should be able to see there. If we start this slideshow now, again, I'm hoping that somebody will be able to WhatsApp me or put something in the chat to say that they can't see this properly, but hopefully you should be able to just see the screen that says Future Starts Now. Future Starts Now, policies for the next generation. And that's really the thing, is again, just to look at these policy decisions that we take now that will impact young people into the future, and I suppose importantly how they can also connect in with that would be really, really important. So the framing for this as well, we are hearing an awful lot about. We have the presidency of the Council of the European Union in the second half of 2026. That is going to shape a lot of the conversations that we're having. So again, it's a really timely opportunity to include young people in both national and European making policy. So as I said, we take 10 overall headings. We just look at two particular aspects of those in this publication. The publication is up on our website. For this presentation, I am just going to focus on maybe one of the two for each one. And again, I would encourage people to go back and have a read of the full publication. So in the housing one, I don't need to tell anybody on this call. Housing, 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 more housing, all the different types of housing. Housing is the big, big, big conversation that we're all having. What we're seeing, I suppose, is in terms of housing and young people, we are seeing youth homelessness continue to be a significant issue in Ireland. The data on the numbers of people accessing emergency accommodation, they're just showing an ongoing rise in homelessness for those aged between 18 and 24. This is really concerning. There's a vulnerability that comes with youth. There's a vulnerability with not being able to remain in your family home for whatever reason. So this is a bit of a disturbing statistic that young people, as they, as I said, bridging that gap between childhood and adulthood, are having to do it in emergency accommodation, are having to do it without the kind of strong social supports that you would get from being able to remain within the family home. There is a national youth homelessness strategy that is aimed at ending youth homelessness through, lots of different strands. We've got the prevention strand, the improved emergency accommodation, and the structured supports. Ultimately, it always comes back down to affordable, sustainable housing, somewhere that is secure. But I mean, primarily, it's that affordability factor. So what we're not seeing is, and again, anybody on the call who remembers the time of the bed sit, but that it was possible for a young person, a young single person, to be able to live independently on a relatively low or middle income. There is nowhere in Ireland at the moment that is affordable to rent. There's nowhere in Ireland that's affordable for a single person, a young single person on their own to rent. Like, that's a sweeping statement, but I don't think anybody could argue with me. So that is having a huge impact again on people who are, maybe don't have the safety net of a family home to return to if they find themselves out of the private rented sector. It's having a knock-on effect again, as we can see, in terms of family formation, in terms of becoming an adult. Also, education and job opportunities are also impacted by this. And again, the things that happen to you when you're young tend to be very formative. So we are failing a whole cohort of Irish citizens at a time when we have immense wealth. That's the piece I really want people to hold in their mind, is that Ireland is a wealthy country. There's an enormous amount of wealth in this country, and yet we are seeing issues with young people not being able to find somewhere to live. The other piece of the homeless one, or sorry, the housing piece is about young people in home ownership. And again, don't need to tell anybody here, it is becoming increasingly difficult for median income earners, even high income earners, to be able to own homes. People are owning homes later in life. They are taking out much, much longer mortgages. And again, that's having an impact across family formation. When there's conversations about, an aging demographic and falling birth rates, a lot of it will also come back to affordable housing. Our key asks in this area, as always, to increase the supply of affordable social cost rental properties, aimed at young people providing an alternative to the private rented sector. Like, the state really will have to step into this space. Strengthening the preventative measures for young people who are at risk of homelessness by increasing support and also youth housing services, to convert the rent tax credit into a grant or make it refundable to benefit those who are low income tenants, and really looking at those strong pathways out of homelessness for young adults, including long-term secure housing. Our next focus then is on health. And again, no surprise to anybody who pays any attention to anything. We have a serious problem with access to mental health services for young people. What we are seeing is huge waiting lists. As of April last year, we had more than 4,500 children and adolescents waiting for their first child and adolescent mental health services, or CAMS for short. 760 of those had been waiting for over a year. So if you're a family who's concerned about a young person in your home, the thoughts of having to wait a year for them to access the supports must be very, very, very difficult. COVID has definitely done a number on all of us. There's no doubt about it. I think we're still trying to figure out how it has changed who we are, how we operate in the world. Social media is having an impact as well. I mean, that's a giant social experiment that's taking place as we speak, how it's impacting on all of us and how we relate to each other and our communities. But again, young people maybe without something to balance it off or something to compare it to, we are starting to see impacts now across, I suppose, lots of different types of mental health issues, again linked to all of these things. We have well-being indicators, we have well-being frameworks. It's really, really important that all of that be sort of fed through here. So in terms of the healthcare piece, our key asks for young people really is that mental health supports. The mental health funding, it needs to be increased to at least 10%, in line with Launch Care. I think it's currently at 6. And again, the World Health Organization again would also recommend that it would be around the 12% of our overall budget would be devoted to mental health. That's really, really important. And again, looking at, I suppose, prioritizing the treatment pathways for young people to prevent those disruptions during the transition to adulthood. Education is our next piece. And for this one, we focused on the NEETs, which is NEET, which is not in employment, education or training. Ireland, generally speaking, does exceptionally well on education. So when we look at the SDGs, we look at any sort of those sort of metrics that we can see, Ireland really does exceptionally well in getting us through second level education and then into third level education. However, there is a cohort, it tends to be, I suppose, the same cohort we're seeing young men fall behind in terms of access to completing secondary level education and also moving on into third level education at a time when the country is at quote unquote full employment. It's really, really important that we figure out a way of supporting people who maybe cannot engage with traditional educational systems. Apprenticeships is a huge piece as well. Not everybody needs to go to college. Not everybody should be going to college. Not everybody needs to go to college at 18. That lifelong learning will also have to be a part of this conversation. It's really about maybe a slightly more individualized approach to education. And education is important, even things like critical thinking, how we engage with the world. So it's not necessarily about just having a piece of paper that says you can do X, Y, and Z. It is about learning to learn. I think that's also really, really important. So the NEETs, again, you can see from the charts there, Ireland is traditionally, it's the green bar, it is coming down. It is doing quite well, but at the same time, again, in a wealthy Western country where on paper we have access to free education, we really shouldn't be leaving any young person behind to struggle without the education and the tools, I think, as well, to be able to flourish and to be able to fulfill whatever potential it is that you actually have. And again, that would be much more focused into all the different types of education that we can provide in this country. So again, what we're asking for is that we invest in policies that prevent early educational disengagement, particularly in disadvantaged communities, to reduce the long-term risks of that need status. What you can see is, all the stats will show it, is that education is linked with increased earnings, and again, increased earnings over time. So the lower your educational attainment levels, the more likelihood there is of you living in poverty. And again, we've got the whole intergenerational piece. So this is really important to try and sort of, focus in and hone in on those individuals. And again, that education to work transition pathways, that people are really supported during transitionary periods, so to reduce that risk of dropping out of that NEET as well. And again, apprenticeships are really, really important. Vocational pieces, lots and lots of different ways of figuring out your path in the world without necessarily having to do a 3 or a 4 year degree. It's not for everybody. It wasn't for me back in the day, I can tell you that much, for nothing. Rural Ireland, rural development, again, really, really important. That we can see that, I suppose, areas across rural Ireland, that there's always the challenge of providing the services that are needed in rural Ireland to I suppose, a more dispersed population and lower population numbers. I mean, doing a piece of work there recently, I suppose, on financial literacy and on financial well-being. And, you know, Ireland is such a small country that sometimes to look at, you know, an entire country that has maybe the population of a UK city, we should be able to provide a lot of these things again, because the money is there. It might not always be there in the exchequer, but the money is currently there in the exchequer, and it's really a case of how do you do this? How do you create accessibility for rural Ireland, and particularly for young people in rural Ireland? So we focused for two things on this particular section. One was transport, which is a real key thing for young people in rural Ireland. And the second then was the broadband. Again, COVID really, really taught us that the lack of a quality broadband at home is a considerable barrier to your personal development, to your access to everyday items. I mean, I can't, again, I'm from a pre-digital world, but I can't imagine how we ever did anything without access to the internet, how we ever figured anything out without access to the internet. And it has brought a lot of good things. Anybody who's ever paid car tax in person in Dublin back in the day, you had to take a full day off work to go and tax your car. You can now do it at 3 a.m. on your phone. It takes 2 minutes. You know, this is a necessary tool. We're not seeing, again, across the country, we're not seeing full access right the way across the country. And again, particularly for young people, the high-speed broadband, the internet, it's essential for everybody, and particularly those who've grown up in a digital environment, you know, who are very, very well versed in this. And what we're seeing, I suppose, the CSO do really interesting stuff on internet and internet coverage and internet usage. It's young people who are pretty much online all the time. You know, almost all people aged between 16 and 29 use the internet several times a day, compared with only 42% of all adults. And again, that is going to shift over time as older generations who may or may not be as digitally literate die out, for want of better phrasing. You know, this is part of the world that we live in. It's really, really important that coverage is provided no matter where in the country you are. That is essential. And again, I think any gaps within this are going to limit young people's abilities to participate fully online in education, remote work, online services. I know we touched on social media and its impact on mental health, but there's also such amazing things that are available on social media. If you maybe don't feel connected, don't feel the same as your peers, you will find your tribe on the internet. You will find, you know, all your support networks on the internet. So again, it's also just important to note that for many people, that they can find their connection to the internet. They can find their way to be creative, to create music, to self-publish books, all of that stuff like this, all really, really good stuff. And you need to be able to access the equipment and the networks to be able to do that. So our asks for rural development in the transport piece, again, safe walking and cycling infrastructure, really, really important to connect anybody then to their local transport hubs. And the broadband, it is a public utility. It needs to be available to all of us, pretty much, you know, high speed all the time. It's no longer a luxury. It is an essential part of modern living. In the work section, this is the one now that really I found really, really interesting. So we were looking at, I suppose, the piece there on temporary and precarious work for young people. That is an ongoing issue. The types of contracts that young people have, the types of jobs, the entry-level jobs. More needs to be done, I suppose, in terms of contracts around precarious and part-time work. However, it was the impact of AI on young people I thought was really, really interesting. So anybody who has a spare hour or two, I would highly recommend. There was a paper last week from the National Economic and Social Council on AI. And don't get ChatGPT to do a synopsis of it, read it all, because otherwise what did I find in it? There's such a thing as a hallucination leaderboard. You're only going to get that little nugget if you read the entire thing. But that Ireland is quite uniquely situated because of the types of jobs that we have in Ireland, because of the types of industries that we have encouraged to come to Ireland. We are slightly at higher risk of the AI exposed jobs. So there's that overall picture for Ireland. But what was really interesting was it's younger people who are much more impacted by AI replacing the types of jobs that they would do. And when I think about it, that actually makes sense, because if it is entry level jobs into organizations that you can automate, that you can write a program for, that you can, you know, use an agentic tool for. So that makes sense. So I just thought it wasn't really what I was expecting, because the rhetoric is that young people are using AI much more, they're much more versed in it. I was at an event last week, and the younger people, the young people, not even younger, everybody there was younger, but the young people there used AI a lot to manage their diaries, to manage their calendars. They worked with it a lot. So it was just interesting that whilst they are much better at it and much better versed in how to use it, they are also much more impacted by the shift in AI and work than older workers would be. So we really need to be paying attention to that space. Our asks here again, education literacy initiatives as well as retraining schemes, the types of jobs that somebody who's 20 now will be doing when they are 50, we have absolutely no idea. We really need to be constantly upskilling, reskilling, looking at the job market, pivoting, as often as maybe we need to, looking at the challenges for precarious employment for young people, and again, really supporting the widespread adoption of the living wage versus a minimum wage, so that if you do go to work for 40 hours a week, that at least you should be able to provide for a basic decent standard of living at the end of that week. Governance and participation then is the next heading that we focus on. And for this one, we really looked at our friends in the public participation networks and a little piece of research that had been done there about the barriers to involvement. And I suppose what cropped up there, which was quite interesting, was youth involvement in the PPNs, and PPNs with no young people at all. So again, youth, it'll be sort of slightly different figures every time, or slightly different age brackets every time for each, survey, depending on who's doing it. For this, it was 16 to 24-year-olds, so that there was PPNs who had no young people involved at all. Which again, I suppose is a shame, when people are really looking for ways to be connected, to be analog, to be back in a room talking to people. So I would hope that one of the takeaways from this particular piece, and again, SJI is involved with the PPNs, this is something that we will be working hard as well to sort of tackle or to focus on, but that it's a way of getting people involved in their local communities, and ultimately working towards making their communities better, safer, easier to get around, much more connected. Because although we're looking at a lot of national policies, as I keep saying, local is where we live. This is what really, really matters. So our key asks here would be to, again, adequately resource the PPNs, specifically with those structured pathways for youth inclusion and participation, strengthen transparency and feedback mechanisms. So looking at institutional, I suppose, how much we trust in institutions. There was a European Movement Ireland released there only, I think, yesterday or today, again, looking at how connected Irish people feel to the EU, but like that sort of trust in government, trust in European institutions. So we really need to see how our inputs influence policy decisions. That's becoming much, much, much more important with each passing day, considering how unheard some people can feel and how that can manifest. And again, always we are advocating for real participative civil society debate on how we spend the money we have, on what's important to Ireland, on how we should be moving forward. Income distribution, again, always very important. Everything boils down to money at the end of the day, unfortunately. So for this particular one, we also did look at the minimum wage versus the living wage, and the fact that the minimum wage rates are age related. So that is a key issue. But for this one, for the focus of the presentation here, I'm just going to look at the job seekers allowance. And again, anybody who's familiar with job seekers is aware that there is a much reduced rate for those aged under the age of 25, which is quite a drop. So social welfare, as anybody would know who has ever tried to get by on €254 a week, if you are under the age of 25 and do not live independently, you're getting €163.70 per week, which is a very, very, very small amount of money for an adult to get by on. I appreciate that there was discussions about trying to keep people in secondary school until leaving cert, trying to encourage people into further education. But at the same time, it's very, very difficult to be job ready, to be education ready if you've maybe, not continued in school, not gone straight to secondary school, to be ready to do any of those things when your weekly payment is 163.70. And again, I appreciate that anybody who does live independently is getting the full rate. So there seems to be, I suppose, a thought that again, like this is pin money, it's pocket money if you're living at home, as opposed to this is an adult who can do all the things that adults can do, who can vote, who can join the army, who can have a family, and yet at the same time, for this particular section, that we're seeing that quite a sizable reduction in their job seekers allowance. So one of our key asks in this area is that the equalisation of job seekers allowance, so that it's the one flat rate all the way across. There seems to be, I suppose, not quite punishment, but at the same time to disincentivize anybody who may be considering giving up a job to get by on €254 a week, that they would have to think twice if they ended up on €163 a week. That's not how social welfare works. It is really not enough money to get by for anybody. And then in terms of anybody who is working and is young, that those sub minimum wage rates for anybody aged under 20, again, that they be phased out as well. And overall, to align the minimum wage with the living wage. Again, it's really important. Taxation is the hot topic at the moment. And for this one, what we've actually looked at is the future pension provision. So I don't know any young person who's really even remotely thinking about the long-term pension or their future selves. But this is a really important conversation for Ireland to have in general, and also, I suppose, what we want pensions to do. Pensions traditionally provided for your core costs, because the presumption was at the age of 65, either your mortgage was fully paid off and you had no housing costs there, or you were happily settled into long-term social housing. What we're starting to see now is the stats are showing that many, 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 many more people are retiring into the private rented sector. A state pension is not designed to cover that. So we are an aging country, which is brilliant. We're living much, much, much longer, but it's a big conversation about how we're actually going to support Suzanne of 2040 and Suzanne in 2050 when she's retired, and what kind of situation needs to be put in there. But also for the 20-year-old Suzanne in 2026, how are we going to support her pension 50, 60, 70 years down the line? So it's a really important conversation we should be having. Again, what we're seeing, I suppose, is that anybody who is currently paying into it, the current workers fund current retirees. So what we're looking at, I suppose, is those ratios changing of the numbers of people working compared to the numbers of people who are retired. So a massive conversation will have to be had about how all of this is going to how it's going to work. And what you, I suppose, ultimately don't want is for younger workers who may end up having to put through a higher contribution through their working lives, while they themselves might face much more uncertainty regarding their future pension provisions. We talk a lot about intergenerational fairness, and I always think as well like that would apply to each of us as individuals, that as we move through our own lives, that the system also recognises the points where we will need to be putting in and the points where we would need to be taking out, and that there would be fairness attached to all of that. Our asks here, ultimately, I suppose we are talking about, we will need to increase our overall tax take. We don't necessarily need to be coming after labour for that. We don't need to be coming after income tax for that. But we do need to be having a serious conversation about taxation. we are recommending that a new tax take target on a per capita basis be instigated, again, looking at our sustainable revenue base, that it is capable of funding long-term public services. I mean, again, anybody with time on their hands, highly recommend reading the Commission on Taxation and Welfare, that last report. 116 recommendations came out of that, which are quite simply, these are the things we want to pay for, these are the things we want to have as a society. We are going to have to do X, Y, and Z if we want to keep funding those. And again, long-term strategies to ensure sustainable pension provision for current and future generations. Environment and sustainability, again, really, really important. And we always get the sense as well that this is just as, or, well, we're always kind of told, I suppose, it's much more important to younger people. Obviously, they're going to have to live in the world longer than those of us who are older. And there is a real fear, I suppose, about what we are doing to the planet, how sustainable everything we are doing is. I'm conscious that I've just talked about how amazing the internet is and how amazing AI tools are and how amazing everything is digital. The environmental impact, the sustainability of all of that is definitely being called into question. So how do we have the nice things that we want? How do we continue to live in the world that we want to live in? I mean, even when you think about electricity is only, I mean, some households in Ireland won't have had electricity even for the last 100 years. So how do we continue on with the lifestyle that we aspire to, at the same time, by not damaging and trashing the place for future generations? So for this particular bit, it's really about that conversation about the just transition. It's about how do we live today? What impact is that going to have on future generations, on young people, on people not yet born? So conversations about climate neutral society, that is going to have impacts on our labour market. It is also going to require additional support from government. And we can see again that we have a lot of commitments in this area as a country. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, we've climate action plans, we have I mean, there's probably another hour if I could even think of half the legislations that we have to adhere to. But there are massive fines as well coming down the road if we don't meet these targets. So as we can see from this chart here, agriculture and transport account for the largest share of Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions between 2021 and 2024. So when you can see like the concentration in those sectors, you would be able to maybe target those particular sectors for structural change, that you could maybe make real inroads that would have a much bigger overall impact. But again, really looking to make sure that transition doesn't leave the most vulnerable and the most impacted, which is again always should be really part of the conversation. So our asks here, again, retraining and support for any community that will be impacted by any loss of employment related in the move away from fossil fuels. That, I suppose, in light of the recent blockades and protests that we had, I can see that there is the conversation about moving away from our reliance on fossil fuels, the whole geopolitical conversation around fossil fuels. I think in a way that kind of crisis might really ignite a movement to really think seriously now about how are we going to provide the energy to be able to do the things we want to do in a sustainable, environmentally friendly way. Support for those renewable energy schemes, and then again, a reporting system for each of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are rapidly meeting, 2030 is going to be literally only around the corner. I don't know how many Christmases will be left, 3 Christmases, 4 Christmases left till 2030. It's going to come around very, very quickly. And again, Ireland, when we do our annual Sustainable Progress Index, it's the environmental SDGs where we perform the weakest, where we are much further behind than we should be. Then finally, we always look at global issues. This is really, really important. And for this particular one, we, I suppose you can't really help it, but, we were looking at just increased armed conflicts across the world. That's going to have a massive impact on displacement, but it has, again, a huge impact on the numbers of young people who are being forced out of their homes, being forced to apply for refugee status, being forced to apply for asylum status, all across the world. I mean, the number of state-based armed conflicts has increased to its highest level in decades. So we've had long-running wars, we have new wars. It's the highest, yeah, since I think 1946. It's the highest level. So we have war on our doorstep. We have, conflicts right the way across the world. It is young people, I suppose, again, they're really disproportionately affected. So they're either on the move or they're finding that their housing, their education, their healthcare systems, everything has been disrupted. We can see it on our TV screens. We can see it on our phone screens. We know exactly what's happening across the world in this space. So our last ask here is that we use our presidency of the Council of the European Union this year as an opportunity to foster cooperation among member states to develop coordinated human rights-based responses to armed conflict and displacement. I thank you very much. I am going to stop sharing there and then just see if we have any questions or queries. I said I am open to comments as well. If anybody had any comments on any of that, let me just check here as well now. I think I have one or two questions. Again, I won't keep it for too long because I am conscious it is lunchtime. I have a question here, thank you. Based on current trends in youth employment and unemployment, what key patterns are you seeing emerge for young people entering the workforce? And from a policy perspective, what should we be considering now to ensure future employment opportunities are inclusive and sustainable? I mean, the key patterns there, I think you can see where, again, we are a very well-educated country. So I think what you're starting to see, and again, if you look at the work of Kieran Nugent and Neri, is sometimes a little bit of a gap between the types of jobs that we are in, sorry, the types of education that we have and the types of jobs that are available. And you can see that across the world as well, that more and more of us have third level education and there's not enough third level jobs, I suppose, to match that need. So you can start to see that coming through. Also, that AI piece is, and again, I've only just read that NESC report, so I'm still trying to process it. But if Ireland is much more exposed to AI exposed jobs, then that is going to have an impact across the board. And then if that exposure is much more geared towards young people, you've got another layer in that. And ultimately that comes back to housing as well, because I think, your the value of your wage is what it gets you. And that, again, at least that last piece from Threshold and Housing Rights NI, when they were looking at renting in the private sector, that in the Republic of Ireland, anybody who's on a high income, which was classed as 80,000 and above, which is a good income, struggled to find somewhere to rent, struggled to pay rent, and also was very pessimistic about the odds of actually owning a home at the end of that. So imagine like that, you've gone to college, you've done the do, you've got the good job, and you still can't afford to buy a home. So I think that is going to have an impact, as well as like, well, almost maybe what's the point? I think there's a little bit of that, but it's that AI piece I think is going to be really, really interesting to see what happens there. And also, Ireland is traditionally an agricultural country, so I think it's going to be interesting to see in terms of, again, when you look at the statistics around farm ownership, who's working on the farm succession, there's an awful lot of much older people working their farmlands. So I don't even think that's even, you're having one conversation about the farm and then one conversation about AI with young people coming through. But I just think I'm also trying to look at maybe AI and agriculture. There's definitely an overlap there somewhere. So I think there's a little bit there. And then, I mean, the future employment opportunities, that, ensuring that they are inclusive and sustainable. It's that lifelong learning piece as well, I just think is really, really important. when I was in school, good handwriting was important. When I had my first half a dozen jobs, good handwriting was important. That is no longer necessarily a skill that anybody has to have anymore. So it's really a case of, okay, what skills are there, what skills are available, what do people need in order to be able to access the opportunities that are coming along. And I think that learning how to learn is really, really important as well. But that an education that can be woven through the workplace as well, I think is very, very important. Speaking as somebody who was educated as an adult, trying to fit it around a full-time job was very difficult. So even to be able to have much more maybe job based further education or constantly upskilling. And again, they don't all have to be career based either. That critical thinking piece, um, that piece about being able to engage, financial literacy, digital literacy, AI literacy, all of those things. I think they're all going to impact on the world of work and the future of work. So thank you for that. Another question here: how do I think government is doing on poverty reduction? This is being recorded for quality and training purposes, so my inner thoughts will stay inner. Um, I mean, government has poverty reduction and poverty eradication targets. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, again, zero poverty by 2030, and I appreciate that that is measured on $1 a day, but we are nowhere near. And the Roadmap for Social Inclusion, which finished in 2025, we are awaiting the unveiling of the successor, had a target of 2% consistent poverty or less by 2025. And as anybody knows, and as the person who asked the question knows, we've never hit a poverty target in this country. We have the European, I think there's an anti-poverty strategy. I think that's out today. I didn't get the chance to look at it before we came on. But that is also that will also have a target attached to it. We saw from the Silk data earlier on this year, 12.6% of the population, over 600,000 people, are living in poverty. And again, bear in mind that's a household survey. That won't always capture people who are not in households or anybody who's really just not able to engage with the whole survey. There's also going to be that. I mean, one of the critiques that I saw, just the headlines, was that for the European anti-poverty strategy, governments across Europe are being tasked with tackling poverty and reducing poverty, but they're not being given any more money to do it. Ultimately, it is about cash in pockets. It is about ensuring that households have adequate income. I appreciate the services piece needs to be there as well, but this is ultimately about cash transfers. It is about increasing core social welfare rates to a rate that is adequate. We can have massive debates about that, what that level should be, but I know from experience it's never there. We can have conversations about social welfare as a disincentive to work till the cows come home. And so also that is not a thing. If you have to, if you are genuinely turning down a job offer because you are better off on €254 a week, that's a conversation about the job you've just been offered, not about the rates of core social welfare. We are in a year now, 2026, where all prices for everything is going to go up. Everything is made of plastic, everything is covered in plastic, everything comes in on the back of a boat, everything comes in the back of a trolley, or sorry, a lorry, as they would say in some parts of the country. All of our core prices for everything is going to go up this year. And whilst incomes may struggle to keep up, not benchmarking core social welfare rates to something, ours is 27.5% of average weekly earnings, so that at least it's tagged as inflation goes, wages go, social welfare would keep up. So it'll be interesting, I suppose, to see what's in the European anti-poverty strategy. I haven't had a look at it. I'm also very, very keen to get my hands on the next roadmap to see what's in that and what type of initiatives are going to be in that. You cannot tackle poverty if you're not really prepared to increase core social welfare rates or provide adequate, affordable social housing across the board. I think they would really be the two key things there. And just another question there. So talking about, yeah, the living wage, and I suppose, is there a risk that increasing the minimum wage to would lead to job losses? Thankfully, I can put my hand to it now. We did have we did have a piece of research, I think only recently. I think it came from the ERSI, if I recall correctly. It did, yes. Again, anybody who wants to have a look at it, there is a link to it in the publication. Redmond, Kelly and Creighton, that what they found, the SRI research found that increases in the minimum wage in Ireland have not led to job losses among low paid workers. And that really challenges that key minimum wage policy debate. That does strengthen the case for improving pay standards. However, I suppose, again, beyond pay, we also do need to look at the issues of job quality, security, and worker protections in really what is an increasingly fragmented labour market. Now, that could probably open up a conversation about platform work, the gig economy, the types of precarious contracts that people have. But just anybody who's locked into that minimum wage, which I suppose, again, is at least uh, legislated for. The data doesn't track that they're going to, you know, everyone's going to be out of a job in the morning if we put the minimum wage up. And ideally, again, the argument is for the living wage, because when you think about it, if you've got a gap between the minimum wage and the living wage, if the living wage is based on what you need to earn in order to be able to provide for a basic decent standard of living, what you're really saying is this the gap between those two, these are the things you are going without. And you are having to make decisions about core essentials. So again, it's not about cutting back on the avocado toast, it's not about cutting back on, the weekends, your European city breaks. It is about, okay, I can have a dinner 5 nights out of the 7. It's toast or cornflakes for the other two. I can, when I said, when putting on the immersion is now, a sign of luxury, that is very disturbing. Energy costs again are going to rise, so wages are going to have to increase, or costs are going to have to come down. It's going to have to be one or the other, really. Um, and then, so I'm just going to look here now at any other questions there. Um, the one about the youth participation among PPNs. Isn't it the case that young people just aren't interested in volunteering with local community groups when they would rather be off enjoying themselves? I suppose they could do both at the same time. No, again, I think when you look at how people interact with each other, you are seeing a lot of, I suppose, a journey back to maybe analog, a journey back into the room with each other. That something like volunteering actually allows you to spend time with other people on a non-transactional basis. Like, again, when I look at spaces for young people to be, it's almost impossible to find a space where you can just be with other people that doesn't involve spending money. In Dublin city centre, there's all these conversations. There's a particular street in Dublin city centre, Drury Street, where people just sit outside and drink outside. And you're kind of going, well, of course they are, because they can go into town with nothing, and just sit outside, and maybe one other person might drink, but that's okay. Or they might just get a takeaway coffee somewhere. So I just think even that sort of volunteering thing, young people are very involved, generally speaking, in local sports, in their schools, in third level societies. And I think if we can find a way to tap into that, I think that would be hugely beneficial in terms of the isolation piece, in terms of the mental health piece. Again, we have uh, data that shows that Ireland is one of the loneliest countries in Europe, which again kind of sits weird because we sell ourselves as this land of storytellers and, great crack down the pub and all, warm, welcome, friendly people. And yet, if we are self-reporting high levels of loneliness, how can we connect? And especially at a time where maybe trust is breaking down, because we're not really sure what other people's motives are. Like when we talk about things like media literacy and digital literacy, what they found is that by encouraging us to question our social media feeds, and by encouraging us to question our algorithms, and by encouraging us to stop and think about the types of things that are coming through our social media feed, what they're actually finding is that we don't trust anything. So in a way, being back into the room with other people with a common cause, maybe if it's a cleanup campaign in your estate, if it's a rally, if it's pride, if it's a march of some description. And again, you can see that that call to community can be harnessed, and people can rally very, very quickly if you can do it correctly. And we also maybe need to look and see, okay, well, how can we get people together in a really, in a positive way, in a way that is, I suppose, allows people to sort of flourish and spend time with each other. I just think would be really, really important. So again, I just think with that volunteering piece, the benefits, again, when you look at the research done around volunteering, is that there's huge benefits to whatever you're giving your time to, but also I suppose on a selfish point of view, there's huge impacts and huge benefits to you as well as an individual, right the way across, in terms of mental health and well-being and all of that. Again, just that bit about connection, that bit about, it is corny, but wanting to make the world a better place, the miscongeniality moment, world peace, but that there's massive impacts across that as well. I think that's really, really key. And again, it's just be a case of harnessing it. And again, it'll lead us into another conversation about public transport. If you're a young person and you want to get involved, can you get involved? Do you have access to broadband? Do you know the thing is even happening? So all of these things are really, really, really interconnected. So once you, I suppose, pull on the thread of one thing, what you'll find is that, well, actually, governance and participation is now a housing issue. Education is now a health issue. And I think that's always our key thing, is all of these things are connected. That's why we have these 10 headings throughout this monitor, is that they don't all sit in separate bundles, that siloed approach, that it's really, really important. And I think that for me would be the key takeaway from this as well for government, is that we have a housing department, we have a health department, we have an education department, and maybe asking all of those departments to, we have shifted a little bit, we are looking at it more to a child lens, but that also to maybe broaden that out. So what does the Department of Housing think about when it's doing any of its work? Does it think about how this is going to impact children? Does it think about how it's going to impact young people? We could see even with youth work, we've had a shift in youth work now towards diversionary projects and maybe young people at risk, as opposed to just open the doors, everybody's welcome. I think youth work would be, again, there's not enough room in this document to go through everything that we would have even liked to include, but I think youth work is also vital to ensure that any young person who is maybe just trying to figure out themselves, as we all did, that they have a space to be, a third space to be, away from home, away from school, somewhere else where you can figure out who you want to be, how you want to get there, who you think you might be, and again, to spend time with people that doesn't cost money and doesn't cost, there's no entry price. So I think youth work again would be a massive, massive, massive part of this. But that youth focus, that child focus, and that youth focus should really be embedded right the way across all of the government departments. Again, maybe much more so than it is. I am conscious we are coming up from nearly the hour. I don't see any more questions there. So unless anybody is very, very quick off the mark and can get typing now in the next minute, I am going to call proceedings to an end. I just want to say again, thank you very, very much. I encourage reading the report. I would encourage any of the links to other reports in it. Again, it's always really interesting to see sort of what sits underneath this. Our next outing will be our budget choices, our pre-budget submission. I think the entire sector is busy working on that, especially in light of an early budget. I know it's only a week, but It's really, really key. And again, we're coming into some of the big pieces as well for the sector well across the summer with the Social Inclusion Forum and the Pre-Budget Forum, and we'll have the National Economic Dialogue. So again, we look forward to seeing you at some, if not of all of those. Thank you.